In this episode of the Futurist Thinking podcast, I'm talking with Sebastiaan Wolzak, who is the innovation expert working for Burberry, John Lewis, and most recently at Circunomics. We question the status quo. We question the use of methods and methodologies, wonder at OODA loop, doubt in growth and consumption. We wonder, is there a difference and what does it make between improvement and innovation? I also ask, why do you employ and should engage with people that know more than you? You're listening to the Futurist Thinking podcast, where we are sharing live conversations with people of business, design, arts, culture, science and nature who are shaping our futures today. I'm your host, Agata Bisping. Hi Sebastiaan, it's a pleasure to have you at the Futurist Thinking podcast. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
You are an innovation expert and you have worked with many organizations on many projects and you've been many different things. Currently, you are a COO of one of the organizations of the startups that is dealing with the second life of batteries, if I get it right. Can you define yourself? What is it exactly that you are doing?
Mm-hmm. Sure. So it was a bit of a funny coincidence how I kind of came up and kind of ended up in that startup because I wasn't there in the very first place. But they were looking for UI and UX designer because their UI UX designer wasn't able to kind of continue, and they asked me to freelance. And at that same position, at that same time, they were looking for a COO, and suddenly I kind of moved into that position and kind of became that at the end. And one of the major things that I'm doing is kind of building up the organization from a structural point of view. But at the same time, I'm also playing a big part in actually developing the product itself. You know, it's a really complicated topic with a lot of different stakeholders, which brings a lot of kind of complexity to it. And I'm the owner of the product from a user side, basically, and a feature side. So I still do a lot of creative things in my role as a COO, which you might not expect if you just look at the job title.
Yeah, you are an innovation expert, as I mentioned in the very beginning. What does it exactly mean? What does it mean that you are responsible for bringing innovation into the company, whether this is within the product or whether this is within the structure of the organization?
Mm-hmm. I think there are a lot of different definitions of innovation. So I think if we talk about innovation, I think it's important to also kind of define innovation, the word itself, because people have different kind of perspectives on that. And for me, innovation is kind of changing the rules, so changing what is common known, and trying to change value change and creating new spaces, whatever that, whatever kind of topic that basically means. And in the topic of Circunomics, that basically means to kind of start to find blind spots between different players within that ecosystem, within that market that we have. So we have the car manufacturers, we have utilities, we have regulators, and to kind of see where their value chains are and kind of finding the blind spots in between, and then being able to develop a service that kind of then creates a new space for maybe even other companies to kind of design products or services. That on the product side, and on the, let's say, the more COO side of things, I mean, as we in our intro before that spoke already a bit about the last couple of months, what happened, as also expectations from employees are changing massively. It's really hard to actually find people that say, yes, I will come to the office 5 days a week. So even there you need to start kind of being or changing the rules, in terms of, okay, when do people come to the office? How do you actually engage with your employees? What actually makes you an employee and not a freelancer? How are you able to engage employees at the end and kind of have them stick to the company and being happy in the company? And there are major things that we're trying right now to kind of go with the flow and kind of understanding how employees see themselves in the future, and that they're less kind of fixed to one point where they live. So maybe they want to spend 3 months somewhere on Bali, These are things that you need to consider as an employer if you want to attract great talent. And that kind of at the end results in all kind of contract things that you need to do then.
Yeah, and you really need to be creative and innovative to be open to new ways of seeing this connection between the employer and employee, and also the fact that you don't need to be present at the company in order to be engaged. And it doesn't mean that you are a freelancer. It just means that your relation with the company changes, but the trust and the responsibility remains the same, which might be difficult. You also say something that brought me to a conclusion that you are solving problems that can be solved only when you start solving them. Because you cannot have like a predefined problem that okay, the problem starts here and ends there, and this is the greatest formula for all the people to solve this very problem in this very, very way. And innovation is also questioning the status quo, which is how to, as your example, given the idea of how to relate with the employers and employees, but also it brings my question: wouldn't it be easier to introduce innovation and problem solving with methodologies that would allow a structural thinking into a process that is a chaos? So if you have a methodology that guides you through the chaos, it's easier for you to find yourself in a situation of change, of uncertainty. Isn't it helpful to have methodologies while using wicked problems?
Yeah, that's funny that you asked that, because before I joined Circunomics as a COO, I've worked quite a long time, especially in London, for Burberry and John Lewis, kind of working on new growth opportunities and kind of new business opportunities for both companies. And then I joined PwC in the experience consulting, and there kind of that whole kind of methodology thing kind of hit me, let's say it that way. It's a both-sided. It has both sides. One, yes, it can bring structure and it can help. On the other hand, it can also limit you a lot. It can put you into kind of a funnel, and it doesn't really necessarily help to find these blind spots. If you're too close, for example, to your user, or if you run down a process and you actually don't really know what you're doing, if you don't really understand where you are currently and where you want to go, and understand the methodology to get you there, it's a dangerous thing to follow. It's a thing that I've observed the last, 4 or 5 years, that we as a creative industry have done a lot to kind of sell our services through methodology, and that has created an image that everybody that has a methodology can be creative. And that's a hard, or it's a difficult thing, because if you only have a hammer, you're only going to see nails. And you start to see people that have studied something really cool and something really amazing, but I think that with a 5-hour Udemy design thinking course, you have the same skills as somebody has studied 5 years design education, and that's not the same thing. And that's the main problem I have with methodology. It symbolizes, or it suggests something that it's really easy if you follow step A, B, C to come to result. And over the last couple of years, that has shown to be not true in my experience. If you're consulting a bank and you have somebody who's using these tools that is not a pure creative and has done something else before, they end up with a banking app. Well, surprise, that's a bank and a banking app. They don't come up with they don't question things. They're too close to their core business. They run through their empathy, and they create a persona, and then they come up with some fancy personas. Then they run through a customer journey, and they don't really understand when certain tools are applicable. I think that's one of the major things that doesn't necessarily result in great results. Might be innovation, but also might be incremental innovation or improvements. That's a bit my stake.
Okay, so you suggesting that you would end up using the methodologies, you would end up with improvement, not innovation, which is really important to differentiate between what really innovation is and what the improvement is. But what struck me most was this comparison that if you had taken the Udemy course on design thinking and you have graduated from the studies, you have basically the same skills. But where is the difference then? Where is this magical portion that differentiates a innovator from a person that can be a facilitator?
From my point of view, one thing that did great for my, let's say, creative profession, and also maybe the way how I look at innovation was my master's at the Royal College of Art. I think that's where the big difference already is. You have suddenly you're engaging with other people that have different backgrounds, different views on things, and you are left alone with chaos, and you have to solve your chaos yourself. And for example, the RCA doesn't use methodology. It's not a thing where you get shown slides. This is how we do it, and then follow it. And here's your project. But it's more, okay, go. You have 3 months time. Find a problem. Talk with your peers, and that's it. And that's the only thing that you get. And the whole kind of educational part comes from your peers. It comes from talking to tutors that have different perspectives, and it's really the whole core of being creative is being able to immerse in chaos, and then being able to kind of like take the complexity out again, and kind of finding that single story that that makes sense. And I think it's the shift between total chaos on one hand, and then being able to break it down into really simple things and take out the complexity. And that's something that you don't get with a Udemy course, for example. And especially not if it's a repetitive thing. It's not that you do it like that and then it works. It's constantly doing it and learning it and kind of feeling the struggle. And after 2 months sitting there and not knowing where to go, I think that's part of the journey.
Yeah, this also brings a lot of ideas in my head. Basically, the intuition and the maturity, because you cannot get safely out of chaos, or not necessarily safely, but productively in such a way that you really come up with an innovation or a solution, unless you are mature enough to understand what you are going through, and unless you don't surrender yourself to intuition, which for me is not something hectic. For me, intuition is the sum of experiences that you've been through so far. So it kind of correlates for me. But you've mentioned that at your university, your master's, you were given freedom, sort of, and you were trusted enough to be said, okay, this is your topic, so off you go and come back with a solution. And I would like to put that into your experience in PwC and the banks. Can you imagine sitting at the meeting of the board and saying, okay, so here you go. This is the topic that we are giving you. Off you go. You have 3 months, come back with a solution. Do you think this is at all possible with the white collars and people being really strict about numbers, about statistics? We also discussed about the statistics before we went live, that the numbers, if you have numbers that you can relate to, they are easily trusted. Because you can see the greater picture. And if you have only one small number, then it's difficult for you. And this I put into your perspective, that if you are only being exposed to the intuition, the maturity of an innovator, and you don't have data or the methodology to back it up, then it's not that easily trusted. What's your thoughts on that?
It's interesting because at PwC had both. And especially with professional services, so design agencies, but also consultancies, it's also about how you sell it in the first place. So manage expectations from your client. If you have your basic slide deck, where you basically run through, where you put something on where you basically put a methodology on your sales pitch. Yes, that's what the client at the end expects. If you change your sales pitch, actually, clients and also people with a color are open for that. not everyone, not every industry, not every person, but there are people and there are companies open for that. With PwC, for example, we did something for governments in the Middle East where you would say that they wouldn't be open for it. And we have done that over a couple of years with multiple projects where they were open, where they would let us run with the project. Of course, we had some kind of like meetings in between to kind of give them an update and kind of put a bit of structure around it. But we wouldn't do these classic, I don't know, let's meet at your office, we do a design thinking workshop, and then we take that result and put it in a prototype and then a final prototype, and then there you go. Of course, we had meetings and we had also workshops, but these workshops usually would be more information gathering from our side that had maybe the bit of a feel of a design thinking workshop to just, be safe and kind of get everybody on board. But it wasn't that process, and it wasn't sold as such. And I think that's the difference is, how you engage and what you promise your clients. And if you're able to sell that in a different way, clients are open for that as well. That was PwC. And then with John Lewis and Burberry, which are companies for themselves, they would let us do. There was never ever a problem where actually somebody gave us a task, but it was literally like, okay, here's a wild field and go ahead with it. And especially Burberry was really interesting there because when I started Burberry, I was still a student. And back then I talked with Christopher Bailey because he was giving me, it was part of a scholarship that Burberry gave me when I joined the RCA. And it was interesting that they let me just go and even hired me then as a full-time employee and kept giving me that freedom on such a junior level, basically. And an interesting part there as well is that they would transfer what I would come up with actually commercialized projects. So some of the things I've done in my very first year at Burberry, when I was still at uni, they ended up in stores and they're still in Burberry stores available globally. And that's a commitment that, of course, not every company gives you, but there are companies out there that accept a certain level of perceived risk, let's say it that way.
Perceived risk, that is a really nice statement. I'm just wondering on what that depends, that the company allows you that perceived risk. Can you name this factor? What is there that is needed that the company is open to such free innovation, such a free fall? I mean,
I think it's down to people. It's down to being personally engaged with them and on a personal level, give your person that's looking for somebody helping them, to give them the trust that you are the one. They're paying you as a person, not you as a company or you as a proposal, but they actually trust you as a person. And I think it's more on a personal level rather than that there's this golden rule of, okay, if you put this in your slide deck and you do that, people will trust it. I think it's you need to be, sometimes I think it's fair to be a bit honest as well, and say like, look, this is, you have asked for that in your proposal, or you're asking for this, but I would do it differently because of these reasons. It's always a way, it's always a two-sided way. It's a conversation, and if you're able to convince your client in that conversation to trust you as a team or as a person, they are way more willing to take that risk. Because you're not hiding behind a slide deck anymore. And that's the difference with professional services. Often they send out slide decks and they have like a couple of faces there, and then they have signed up for Lisa, Sebastian, and I don't know, somebody else, and then suddenly 3 other people are there. And at the end, of course, they will say like, look, this is in my proposal. I want to have that by, I don't know, next month, and that's it. And that's a different engagement with your client.
Then if that depends on people, then basically I figured that it also needs to depend on what those people have in their minds, whether they are open to such experiment, because if they do it for the first time, it will be nothing than just experiment because they don't know the outcome, and whether it is the cost or is it investment. Mm-hmm. How we would like to see innovation in a company, that you invest in something that you get back also. So you say that there is no golden rule, but you need to meet certain people. How do you do that?
You can't do it with everybody. I can tell you that it's really hard to find people that are open to do that, which I'm struggling now as well in my current position, because these people are really rare. But you can find them. And for example, with PwC, I had a team and I also found some people there. And of course, you can't just throw them into the cold water, even though these tend to be people that want to be thrown in the cold water because they, that's where their excitement come from to a certain degree, a certain uncertainty. How we would do it there is we would take them on. So there would be part of the onboarding would be that they would join, for example, me or another colleague who would have done it and kind of get into it. And more and more, I as a leader in that sense, for example, would merge out of it or kind of reduce my time in that project or with that client and let the other person take the stage. I think that's another important part there as well, is to know if you have a team and if you want to promote is the wrong word. If you want to help other people excel, at some point you need to step down and let other people excel. And I think in that perspective, what we discussed before, that's one of the elements, or maybe that's the golden rule, to take yourself out and kind of help other persons do that as well, but stay in the background and give them the stage. And then I think you get quite a strong creative team that can cope with that. But it requires time.
It requires time, and again, for me, it requires maturity to be able to say, okay, I'm enough. This is not my stage anymore. This is your place now, and I'm here at your side, but not in your row, to help you, to guide you, or whatever you need. I will be standing right beside you, and this is something really important and not so obvious in many professions, especially creative professions or professions that are of high business, when ego comes into place and plays a major role in many projects, distracting people from working on the solution, but working on how to make their egos bigger. This is also my kind of observation. But then you say that methodology can sometimes interfere with the creative process. What is your methodology then? Because it is kind of difficult for me to believe that you run the process without any structure. And then if the structure is not methodology, then what it is?
Of course, there is a certain methodology behind it. Maybe that's also something that people can look up when they listen to it. There is something that is called OODA loop, which is military strategy. And if you look at it from the first place, it looks like design thinking, but it's not. So OODA is observe, orient, decide, and act. I've actually Googled it and kind of found a lot of people that make cross references to it with design thinking, where they say that observe means understand, orient means define, decide means design, and act means delivery. And I think there's already the major mistake in a lot of people's thinking and mind, and for parts even design education, because observe doesn't mean understand. Observe means you open your eyes and you walk with open eyes. Not everything that you see you understand or you need to understand, and that's I think the major thing with innovation and being creative is, trying to see as much as you can and throw yourself into new situations. And then you have a huge mess of things. That's how I work. You have a lot of observations, and then you start to kind of structure it and try to put it in boxes and try to sort it and kind of then see if there's anything interesting in things that you have observed. That might be you're experimenting with materials or colors or something else, but it also might be that you sit in a park or you sit in a restaurant and you just watch people, for example, or you go on social media and see how people spend their day. And again, it's not about understanding, it's about observing. It's about getting as much input as possible, because our brains are actually pretty good in actually keeping that in our head without being super present and helping you make decisions. There are a lot of examples where these kind of things work, or where people would have experimented with it, where you have passive input that actually generates or influences decisions that you make afterwards. And I think that's
those
one
are
of
also the heuristics, how heuristics works. You simply make your life easier by making choices based on superficial data that you've been running through the whole day based on the input that you have given.
Yes, and that's in my experience, that's how I do it. I kind of engage a lot with all kind of different information, all kind of things. I put myself in all kind of different shoes, and just let that sit. And at some point, I start to make connections, and then I go into the normal design process. And I think that's a major part. Is this little part before you actually go into user-centered design or design thinking or whatever methodology you use. Is that first part actually opens up your opportunity space at the end? That where the interesting parts happen.
This is the observe, the very first part, and it brings to my mind the conversations we had with Sam Devillard, who is a cultural analyst, who says that joining the dots by observing things without giving them definitions, without being having any predefined attitude towards it. It's just observing and absorbing what you see. And the same also said Arne Hendricks, that you listen and you observe just to watch, not to really understand. And all of a sudden, after some time, it just like puzzles or like the labyrinth game falls together. Yeah. But then there is another step. It's the Orient part. What's that if that's not defining part?
I think the Orient part is the understanding part. It's actually, when you start seeing these dots connect, you have a lot of dots in your head now because you've served a lot, and you start to see patterns. I think that's Orient. That's not necessarily defined because they don't need to be defined, but you start to see certain patterns. Maybe these are patterns in different industries that have different behavior. It might be patterns in people's behavior. That's the Orient. It's kind of like looking right, looking left, and kind of starting to see things that are relevant that you've observed and that kind of that interconnect. I think that's the Orient.
And then you decide which line, which path that is composed out of the spots you decide to take, and only then you act.
Yes.
So it is. Can you say that it is a slower process than understand, define, design, and delivery? Because this is something that I can feel that it is slower. I mean, you stop earlier because you don't give the prototype and you don't come back with the information. Okay, we should change this and this, and this is something that is ready for market. We just stop and say, okay, this is something you should look at, and then you can start another process.
Yeah, but it's more it should be more passive. It shouldn't be a client comes and a bank comes and wants to have something, and then you start doing it, because then it's forced. The fact that you are doing it for a bank already defines your behavior. You're going to go into the city. You're going to look at banks. You're going to look at how people spend money. But maybe the answer lies into you visiting with family a zoo. I don't know, maybe it's the behavior of an animal that triggers something. I think that's the thing. The part that I described before is a more passive thing. It's not something that is forced, but it's more how you engage in general things. And if you've had space, it's just things that my head is constantly running, even though I'm not doing a project. And I'm constantly looking at things that are, okay, this could be interesting, that could be interesting. I have it on the shower. If I'm showering, I'm thinking. Or when I'm driving car, it's a time when I'm for myself. All these things I start to put into place, and it has nothing to do with projects, but it helps me to be more innovative with projects, because I can start then kind of linking these things.
This is also amazing that great minds think alike, because also coming back to the conversation we had with Arne Hendricks, he ended up his conversation saying, "I cannot help but wonder." So this is something that is really common for great thinkers, that they can't stop thinking or gather the information. And what is also important for me is that you mention a pause, that you need to stop thinking that certain solutions need to be forced because of a bank. So you need to have a quick delivery, think of money, think of big money, think of delivering big solutions for big money. But you need to take a step back and have a while to think about things that are totally outside of the box. And having that in mind, I also think that it is contrasted with the world of constant growth, of constant willingness, of amass certain abundance, of the willingness of being more all the time. Is there a golden rule that you can teach people or show them that less is enough?
I think one of the, I think you already gave the answer, because in order to do what I just said, you need to accept that you are bored, for example. You need to accept a certain, as I said before, headspace. If you're constantly consuming, whatever that means, it might be Instagram, it might be, buying new clothes, it might be, I don't know, talking to friends all day long. The day only has 24 hours. So yes, there should be, you should consume less, whatever that means, in terms of, can be material, can be physical, can be buying things, but it also can be how you spend your time. I think there needs to be time where you don't do anything, and then that's where your brain has time to actually connect these dots. But however, like how the world works, of course, and also the profession of creatives, usually, it's always an iterative kind of thing of creating new things and doing new things. So, we design things that keep people engaged. So it's an interesting question. On one hand, we say, okay, you need to have time for yourself. You need to, sit and relax. On the other hand, a lot of us are working on how do you even get the last minute of engagement from your end user, to, I don't know, spend another 5 minutes in the app and being able to blur in commercials for another 5 seconds that gives you another 2 cents of revenue. Yeah, it's a tough one, because I don't think there's a golden rule. I think just that sometimes being bored or being alone is not necessarily a bad thing if you use that time wisely.
That's a tricky question, especially that some designers come up with apps that help you get bored or engage you with, with the boredom, or to have it designed in your daily schedule that, okay, you plan this boredom for 30 minutes, and this is the app that calculates the minutes of your boredom or of your time off.
The question, though, is if your brain works the same way. And I would doubt that if somebody else says now, okay, now you're bored and now you don't do anything and now you don't think about anything, I'm not sure if my brain works the same way, and actually, that I would jump with these things.
This is another huge question actually we have at Green Hat about the data-driven design, that how do you actually use the data, and how can you say that the algorithm knows that, for example, today you are tired and that you don't give a hoot about the things that are going out in the world, but the data that have been collected about you, they say, okay, because this was your daily routine, you should do this and this today. And this AI doesn't know that I'm totally off for today. And where this is not for me to answer, but this is just my great question, whether we will reach a point at which the artificial intelligence will know that, okay, this is the day that you don't feel good. I mean, that this is not the day you will follow your daily routine because your statistics or something that I figured and taken from your data doesn't match. Whether simply AI will have an intuition, which is something that has not yet been there, although the quarks situation in which they are not operating in O and 1, but 0.1, that brings a lot of change to this idea. This is my general conclusion. I don't know if you would like to share any comments on that.
It's a really ethical question as well. So how, if you go really crazy, human beings become part of a large game at the end. Your Sims at the end. If you can calculate everything, everything is calculated, and we as humans let ourselves being fully guided by technology, by somebody else who's deciding for us, because in fact that's what you more or less described, and is a question if we actually want that as human species on one hand, and the second part though is, I think it's that we reach that point will probably take a long time, because your personal well-being, like your personal mood and things, of course, is defined by yourself to a certain degree, and might be defined by weather, and might be defined by a person in your room, but it also might be defined on external things that are not as easily linked. You know, it could be the lazy lady at the bakery that is in a bad mood as well. And I used to suddenly I bump into her, and it's just one word that I don't like, and suddenly I'm in a bad mood. So I think it's a really hard thing to calculate, you know, days at the end. But it would be a scary future if an AI could basically define our perfect day. Yeah, because that would be weird.
So we are naturally going to a question: what the world will look like in 2030 or 2040? Do you have any pro tips for designers how to get ready for that? And what can be our greatest surprise, chance, and regret by then?
I think one major thing I think is I call it a globalized citizenship. What I mean by that is, you know, if I said earlier already, the whole kind of way how people work, and you know, and probably also how they define home, in my opinion, will change, not for everybody, but for a certain geography or like a certain amount of people, that will change, and it will massively impact how people move, where money moves, how regulators will try to taxate these people. It will impact how maybe children are educated, you know, because if I can choose that I'm in the winter I'm in Dubai, and in autumn I'm in Portugal, and in the summer for some
I get back home, for example, wherever
I get back home, but then there's already a definition what is home, because today we are, you know, how do we define home, and when and how do we decide where we actually want to live? And it's often either we grow up somewhere, or we have relatives there, we move somewhere because of a personal relationship. But we really see that a lot of people, and especially the younger they get, the more they're engaged online. You know, if you look at restaurants, you know, friends are sitting together, but they sit together and they eat together, but at the same time they all are engaging on social media and smartphones with other friends. So, you know, it's already a move where personal connections are way more digital than they used to be. So it's not necessarily important anymore that you live in the same city or even the same country. That on one hand. On the other hand, one aspect is why people are moving is because of work, because they don't want to spend 3 hours to work or even an hour to work, so they move close to their employer. If suddenly the employer doesn't need them to be there anymore and gives them the freedom to move wherever they want, that suddenly opens up completely new options, especially then if you are, you know, if you have a digitalized education system as well, where even your children can move around freely as well. That might have a big impact on tourism, that might have impact on business models of hotels, that might have impact on mobility in general. So that might be how people in general move around. It might have impact on if you buy a car, rent a car, or if you have these new models where you basically can rent long-term a car for 3 months. I think one of these things is as soon as people have more freedom to move around because they're not linked to one place because they're contractually forced to it, it has good and bad sides. So suddenly you have a lot of rich people moving into really poor countries because it's nice there. You know, what happens to your people there as well? So it opens up a lot of bad and bad and good things at the same time. And I think that's something to look out for, because I think there's a lot of space in there. So how do you support?
I also.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt, but it came to my mind that there is also a huge mental health issue within it, because despite the mobility, the freedom of movements, the flexibility of the employers and employees, but the fact that you are constantly on the move and you are never at your place, you are never rooted. And then there is the definition of identity. Who am I? If my parent is French and German, I grew up in Portugal, but we lived in Thailand and then moved to Argentina. Where am I? Who am I? This is the identity issue. or you can be of digital nationality. Then there is the solution, and the fact that you've mentioned that many young people interact with their friends digitally and they are digital nomads and digital natives. Then it may occur that the digital nationality is something that really defines you, which is, for me, born in the early 80s, kind of scary because this is something new for me. And obviously, as an older generation, I may consider the digital as being something that keeps you away from the real life. But on the other hand, for my daughter, who is digital native, this is her real life. So she doesn't get my perspective, but we understand each other and we respect each other. That is important, which is not so obvious.
I think that's one of the major things of what innovation, for example, does as well. To some people, it's a threat. And to other people, it's a great opportunity. So, for your daughter, for example, it might be a great opportunity because she has a whole different set of values towards digital and how she engages as you have that, for example. So naturally, that is something that will cause one person to see it as threat to a certain degree, and the other person as the greatest thing on earth. That's how it is.
It only depends on how we use it, whether we will be able to use it in a way that serves the humanity. Then I have another question. What was your greatest professional challenge?
I think my greatest creative challenge was the RCA for sure, as of the mentioned things before, as they were really great at putting you into an empty room and letting you sort yourself out. Professional, I think the greatest professional one is actually my current position, especially because I'm not just purely doing creative work anymore, and I suddenly have to do finance and recruiting and governance models and things like that. But I think what challenges also is the learning curve the greatest. So I think that's one thing, maybe not for everybody, but I think generally for open-minded creatives, that's one of the things that make you excel the greatest if you are looking for things that challenge you, because creatives tend to be okay with being dropped in the water. And if you need to find yourself and orientate and finding solutions by yourself, I think that's one of the golden rules to excel in your creative career, in my opinion, because it's always easy. Let's say it that way. It's easier to learn from mistakes because you actually, if you reflect a bit, it's easier to understand why something went wrong, as if you search for a safe path and things go well. It's way harder to reflect on, okay, why did I actually go well? So I personally tend to be somebody who keeps throwing myself into something that I don't know, because the learning curve is just such bigger. So in general, I've done that in my career all the time. But yeah, my greatest current challenge is my new position, as I have to dig into all kind of new topics that I haven't touched that much before.
So keeping you in an empty room at RCA really proved to be a great experience in the very beginning, because this is how you learn how to throw yourself into the greatest challenge of handling emptiness, for example.
Yeah, maybe empty room is the wrong word, though. It sounds so negative. It's an empty room with a lot of peers, but you're not given a direction. It's a plain field.
Yeah.
And it's the orientation part that is the challenging part, I think.
Yeah, and for me, empty room is not something negative. It is something that really brings. It's like you are being given an empty paper card, and yes, all of a sudden you are given a pen, and there is so many things you can do with it. It only depends how do you see it, as a threat or as an opportunity, as we've said. What are the things you are looking forward to?
Well, I personally, for example, look forward to all the changes that are coming now with the last months or the last 1.5 years. So all the kind of things, implications on how people see see their work-life balance and where they actually spend their time working, as it opens up for me opportunities as well. So I just recently came back from a warmer country and I was able to work there. That I'm looking forward to. And I'm looking forward to something where I, on one hand, can through my maybe non-expert view on, for example, HR and how contracts used to be the last 50 years, to actually be able to really change at least how people at our company can work and how they how they perceive work and what keeps them actually working with us and wanting to work with us. That on one hand. On the other hand, there's another huge thread that we haven't touched about, and that's the whole kind of mobility part, where you have all these electric vehicles and batteries that at some point will just kind of hit us really bad. And I'm looking forward to actually be able to solve that problem. So that's what keeps me busy the last months and will keep me busy the next couple of years. And that's a great challenge. And I think that's the same thing. It opens up a great opportunity for me to learn and to actually do something that impacts a lot of people if we do it well. So that's what I'm looking forward to.
What is the role of the designer?
That depends a bit on the context, because designer, even as a controller in a financial function, you can be a designer. I think the core thing that makes out a designer is being able to be able to start with something. So it's one thing is usually two types of people. There is a starter and there's a finisher. There's somebody who is happy with starting things, but usually kind of loses interest at some point. You kind of make it perfect, and then you have another type of person that needs direction, but then is really good at kind of finishing it and making something, for example, pixel perfect. And I think let's talk about creative, not about designer, because designer can also mean that you are somebody who just, likes security and, and you are somebody who says, okay, I just really like the craftsmanship of doing something of that might be, I don't know, textiles, or it might be a graphic designer, and they can be finishers as well, because they just enjoy making something really pretty or really, pixel perfect. Whereby creatives tend to be people that start things. And I think I lost the connection to your question, but creatives tend to be more people that start things. And I think that's something that is not linked to a creative profession. It doesn't need to be a designer or an artist. It can be any functional. It can be in any function, depending on if somebody's open for that or not.
My question was about the role of a designer. Then we change it to the creative, and I guess that the creatives can start, but it comes up to my mind is that we do need finishers.
We do.
Without the finishers, we would only have the starters, and everything would be havoc and chaos. Yeah. I have two last questions. What are the people you look up to? You've mentioned earlier in our conversation that majority of the projects depend on the people you meet on the way. So are there any people that you look up to?
I don't have a specific idol or something. I can give you a name. But as we already said before, it's the people that you engage with or you hire that tend to be my idols. And, everybody. It doesn't matter who it is. Somebody brings something with them through experience, through their passion, through anything. And I think if you're able to pick out these things, everybody can be an idol. At least for me, everybody can be an idol. I think that would be the answer to that, because I don't have that particular person where I could say, okay, I admire, I don't know, Elon Musk, or I admire Don Norman, or whoever it is, because they all have, they're great things, and some of them have also really weird behaviors and things that I feel are not really responsible. But I think it appears around you as well. And one thing that struck really with me, a former boss told me early in my career, is always hire people that are better than you. And I think that's a great thing to stick to always look for people that are better than you, because first of all, they help you do your work on one hand. On the other hand, you often can learn a lot from these people.
This is great that you are telling this, that we should not be afraid of letting ourselves in a situation or in a company of people that are better than you or know better than you. You should be the one that knows the least in the room, as to paraphrase a different saying. But also the fact that you look up to peers also brings us to the grounds where we admire people that are not the Nobel Prize winners or the Pritzker winners, or the one that really achieves something that is, being viewed as stardom or as a celebrity on a level that is not touchable by people here on the ground. Because I deeply believe that the innovation is also the sum of small steps. And if we surround ourselves and believe that you and I, we can really make this world a better place, however, this is a cliche, but still, if we have this belief that our impact and the way we think we work can really bring the change, and that there is a person next to us who also shares this belief, it is a great impact that we can make on people and on the planet, and especially with your project also about the life cycle of the batteries. In the view of the new perspective, is also a great combination, so to say, to believe in that. And the very last question is, what is the recent fiction that you read?
I've read a lot of design books in the last couple of years. So Don Norman, for example, is one I can recommend. Some of the books, of course, are already older, and the references might not be applicable for everybody listening. But if you try to understand the quality behind what he's saying, I think it's still really relevant. And he's a smart guy, He has.
You are talking about the design of everyday things.
For example, yes, yeah. I think it's a great source of, or it's good, food for thoughts. And then I can recommend something else to look at. It's not a book. It's a campaign that Casey Neistat, some of you might know him. He's a YouTuber from New York. He did together, I think with Samsung it was, something which he called "Do What You Can't." And I think it's
okay.
Yeah, and I think it's a great thing, because I would like to encourage more people to do that, and to do things that they can't. These are the two things. So Don Norman, and Do What You Can't.
Okay, and with that, I would like to thank you for our conversation, and I hope we manage to encourage as many people as possible to do what they can't.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You are listening to the Futures Thinking podcast, where futures meet present, powered by Green Hat Innovation and 360inspiration.nl.